"This necklace belongs to my dead wife, the millionaire," said his voice, slicing through the soft clink of crystal like a blade. Every head in Mirador Imperial turned. Under the chandeliers in the most exclusive dining room in San Pedro, Garza Garcia. Adrián Velasco stood rigid beside his table, finger pointed at a cleaning employee, frozen mid-step. She wore a burgundy uniform and bright yellow rubber gloves, her breath trapped in her throat, as if the whole room had suddenly stolen her air. Around her neck hung an antique cameo, gold-framed, impossibly delicate, catching the light, like a secret that refused to stay buried. "I didn't steal anything, sir," she stammered, one hand flying to protect the pendant. "I've had this since I can remember." But Adrian was already walking toward her, his eyes shining with a pain too old to be explained in public. 24 years ago, his teenage bride, Valeria, died in a car crash 1 month after their secret wedding, 1 month after he had saved every peso to buy her that very cameo. It vanished the night she died. No police report ever recovered it. No rumor ever found it. And yet here it was resting on the throat of a stranger. The young woman's name was Amina Reyes, a black woman with honey-brown eyes widened in terror as the restaurant's elegant murmur turned into a single held breath. Adrian's voice dropped, trembling with disbelief. "Where did you get it?" Amina swallowed hard, cheeks burning, as staff gathered and the manager rushed over. "Please," she whispered, barely audible. "It's mine. It's always been mine." In that moment between wealth and poverty, grief and fear, a lost love and a living mystery, one tiny necklace began to pull an impossible truth toward the light. The room slowly returned to motion, but Adrián Velasco felt as if time had cracked open beneath his feet. As the manager hurried forward with apologies and nervous smiles, Adrian barely heard a word. His gaze was fixed on the cameo, resting against Amina Reyes' collarbone, rising and falling with her shallow breaths, as if it were alive, waiting. For 24 years, Adrian had learned how to exist without truly living. Wealth had come easily. Power followed. But none of it filled the hollow space left behind the night Valeria died. They had been 16, reckless, terrified, and wildly in love. Married in secret. Certain love was enough to survive anything. The cameo had been his promise to her, bought with months of savings, slipped into her trembling hands on her birthday. Forever, he had told her. And then forever ended on a rain-slicked road. After the accident, Adrian searched obsessively. He questioned police officers, combed through wreckage reports, begged morgue attendants. The necklace was never found. Eventually, people stopped mentioning Valeria's name around him, as if silence could cauterize grief. But grief does not heal that way. It only hardens. Now, standing in a glittering restaurant surrounded by privilege and pretense, that grief surged back with brutal clarity. The cameo was real. The weight of it. The design. Even the way it caught the light, exactly as it had on Valeria's skin. Adrian's chest tightened, his breath uneven. This was not nostalgia. This was collision. Across from him, Amina looked impossibly small. She wasn't defiant or greedy. She was afraid. Her hands trembled not with guilt, but with the terror of someone used to being invisible, suddenly thrust into judgment. Adrian softened his voice, though his eyes burned. "Please," he said quietly, as if the word might break him. "I need to understand. Because if that necklace had survived the past, then maybe something else had too." They moved away from the dining room quietly, as if the restaurant itself sensed the fragility of the moment. Inside a private lounge lined with dark wood and muted light, the noise of wealth faded into a distant hum. Amina Reyes sat stiffly on the edge of a leather chair, her hands folded in her lap. the cameo resting against her chest, like a silent witness. Adrian Velasco stood across from her, no longer the untouchable magnate, just a man holding his breath. "I swear I didn't take it," Amina said again, softer now, her voice trembling with exhaustion rather than fear. "This necklace has been with me my whole life." Adrian lowered himself into the chair opposite her. "Tell me," he said gently. "Please, tell me everything." Amina hesitated, then nodded. She spoke of growing up in San Jose orphanage, of being found as a newborn, and brought to a hospital by a man no one could identify. There were no records, no name, no family searching, just a tiny baby wrapped in borrowed cloth and one small object around her neck. "The nuns kept it safe," she said, touching the cameo with reverence. "They told me it was the only thing I had when I arrived. When I turned 16, they gave it back to me, said it belonged to me by right. I've never taken it off." Each word landed heavily. Adrian felt the room tilt numbers, aligning in ways he had never allowed himself to consider. Amina was 23. The accident had been 24 years ago. His heart began to race, not with certainty, but with a dangerous, fragile hope. He studied her face, then really looked. The honey-brown eyes, the dark hair, the familiar curve of her mouth when she grew uncertain. Memories stirred Valeria laughing in the sun, Valeria tilting her head the same way when confused. "May I see it?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Amina stood and stepped closer, allowing him to turn the pendant over. His hands shook as he read the engraving on the back. The air in the private room felt suddenly too thin to breathe. Adrian Velasco leaned back against the wall as if the weight of the truth had struck him physically. The engraved letters on the back of the cameo still burned in his vision. A+V. Forever. His promise. His handwriting. His past staring back at him from the neck of a young woman who should never have been wearing it. "Amina." His voice broke as he said her name, unfamiliar and suddenly precious. "How old did you say you were?" 23, she answered quietly, confusion knitting her brows. "Why?" The number echoed in his chest. 23. Valeria had died 24 years ago. Died, or so everyone believed. Adrian pressed his palm against his sternum, trying to steady the violent pounding of his heart. He remembered the hospital hallway, the sterile smell, the way the doctor's mouth kept moving while his world collapsed. He remembered being told there was nothing left to save. He remembered never being told she was pregnant because no one else had known, except him. Valeria had been 8 weeks along. Adrian looked at Amina again, really looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. The shape of her eyes, the warmth of their color, the way she held herself guarded, resilient, accustomed to surviving without anyone catching her when she fell. His throat tightened. "I need to ask you something," he said slowly, choosing each word with care. "And I know it may sound impossible." Amina stiffened her fingers, curling unconsciously around the cameo. "Okay, have you ever had a DNA test?" he asked. "Has anyone ever tried to find your biological family?" She shook her head. "They tried when I was little. There were no records. After a while, I stopped hoping." Her voice softened. "I thought whoever left me didn't want to be found." The words cut deeper than any accusation could have. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, resolve hardening through the shock and fear. "I would like to do a DNA test," he said. "With you. And with me." Amina's breath caught. Why, she whispered, already sensing the answer. "Because my wife was 16 when she died," Adrian said, tears finally slipping free. "And she was pregnant. Because the timing matches. Because that necklace should have been buried with her, and instead it protected you." Silence fell between them, heavy and sacred. "I'm not saying anything for certain," he added quickly, almost pleading. "But I can't walk away from this. I need to know." Amina placed a trembling hand over her stomach, mirroring a gesture neither of them realized they shared with the same woman. "If there's even a chance," she said softly, then, "I need to know too." In that moment, they were no longer a billionaire and a cleaner, no longer strangers bound by suspicion, but two souls standing at the edge of a truth that could shatter everything they knew or finally make them whole. 2 weeks passed like a lifetime suspended between breaths. The manila envelope sat untouched on Adrian Velasco's desk, catching the afternoon light, as if it were alive, waiting, watching. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Monterey moved on as it always did, traffic flowing, deals closing, people laughing. Inside, Adrian could not remember how to exist in a world where that envelope did not hold his entire future. He had spent those 2 weeks seeing Amina Reyes in quiet places, small cafes, modest restaurants where she felt safe. They talked for hours. She told him about the orphanage, about learning early not to ask too many questions, about nights when she wondered if anyone in the world remembered her first breath. Adrian listened, his chest tightening with every word, imagining a childhood lived without him, without Valeria, without protection. And now there was no more waiting. His hands shook as he finally tore the envelope open. Pages rustled. Numbers blurred. Scientific language meant nothing until his eyes found the final line. Probability of paternity 99.97%. The paper slipped from his fingers and drifted to the floor. Adrian did not move. Then his body folded inward, breath breaking apart as something ancient and unbearable finally gave way. He cried, not quietly, not with dignity, but with the raw, heaving sobs of a man mourning 24 stolen years and discovering in the same moment that love had survived them. "She's alive," he whispered into the empty room. "My daughter is alive." He called Amina immediately. She answered on the first ring. Adrian, her voice was tight with fear. "Did the results come?" "Yes," he said, voice hoarse. "Please come here. I need to see you." When she arrived, she hesitated in the doorway, eyes red, shoulders tense, ready for disappointment. Adrian crossed the room in 3 strides and opened his arms without thinking. Amina stood frozen for half a second longer, then stepped into him, collapsing against his chest. They held each other, as if letting go might undo the truth. "I should have been there," Adrian whispered into her hair. "Every birthday, every scraped knee. I'm so sorry." Amina shook her head, tears soaking his jacket. "I didn't know who to miss," she said. "But now I know where I come from." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, at Valeria's eyes staring back at him through time. "If you'll let me," he said carefully, "I want to be your father. Not to erase who you are, but to walk beside you from here on." Amina nodded, breath trembling. "I want that too." In that moment, grief did not disappear, but it transformed. Love long buried had found its way home. The truth arrived in fragments, slow, painful, undeniable. Adrian refused to let the miracle exist without answers. Love had reunited them, but truth was what would anchor them. He hired investigators, reopened cold files, demanded police reports that had not been touched in decades. What they uncovered reshaped everything Amina thought she knew about her beginning. Valeria had not died instantly. The report revealed what no one had seen back then, after the crash broken, and bleeding Valeria had crawled from the wreckage into the darkness of the forest. Driven by something stronger than fear or pain, she had walked nearly a kilometer before collapsing in an abandoned cabin. There, alone and terrified, she went into premature labor. No doctors, no help. Only a mother's instinct and a promise she refused to break. She gave birth to Amina with her last strength. A man named Esteban Torres, a drifter living in the mountains, found her hours later. Valeria was dying, the baby barely breathing. Through tears and blood, she pressed the newborn into his arms and begged him to save her child. Esteban ran through trees, through fear, through his own broken life, until he reached a hospital. He left the baby there, terrified of being blamed, never knowing that one act of mercy would echo across generations. When Adrian told Amina everything, she did not speak at first. She cried not the sharp sobs of discovery, but the deep, shaking grief of finally understanding the cost of her survival. She cried for a mother she never met, yet somehow always carried within her. A mother who had loved her enough to give up everything. "I was wanted," Amina whispered at last. "She didn't leave me." "No," Adrian said, his voice breaking. "She saved you." Healing did not come all at once. Amina began therapy, learning how to hold both gratitude and grief without breaking. Adrian learned how to be present without trying to replace the past. He did not rush her. He did not rewrite her life. Instead, he walked beside her quietly, steadily. Sunday dinners, shared memories, photographs of Valeria brought out of boxes sealed by pain. Amina chose when to step forward. When she was ready, she returned to school to pursue nursing the dream she once buried under survival. Adrian supported her not as a savior, but as a father finally learning how to love out loud. The past could never be changed, but it had finally been told. And in that truth, both of them began to breathe freely for the first time in 24 years. A year later, the cemetery outside Monterrey was quiet beneath a gray November sky. Adrian Velasco stood beside Amina Reyes, their hands intertwined, the earth still damp from an early rain. In his other hand, he held a bouquet of white roses, Valeria's favorite. For decades, he had come here alone, carrying only grief. Today, he came carrying gratitude. Amina wore a simple black dress. The cameo rested against her chest, warm now, no longer a mystery, but a memory made whole. As they knelt before the white marble headstone, silence wrapped around them, not heavy, but reverent. Adrian spoke first, his voice soft, steady. "Valeria," he said, "I found her. Our daughter. She's here." His breath caught, then steadied. "She's strong. She survived because of you." Amina felt tears slip down her cheeks as she placed her fingers against the stone. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered, tasting the word she had never been able to say. "Thank you for fighting for me. I promise to live a life that honors your love." They stayed there a long time, letting the past and present meet without fear. When they finally stood to leave, Amina turned to Adrian, her eyes clear with a decision she had been carrying quietly. "I want to change my name," she said. "Not to erase who I was, but to claim who I am. I want to be Amina Velasco Roman." Adrian pulled her into an embrace, overcome. "You've always belonged," he whispered. "Whatever name you choose." Life did not transform overnight, but it moved forward steadily, honestly. Amina returned to school to study nursing, the dream she once set aside for survival. Adrian learned how to be present without trying to compensate for lost time. They built a rhythm of Sundays, shared meals, photographs of Valeria brought into the light at last. Years later, when Amina graduated, Adrian sat in the front row applauding until his hands hurt as her name was called. She touched the cameo, smiling, no longer a symbol of loss, but of promise. That small piece of jewelry had traveled through love tragedy, silence, and survival. It had waited patiently for the truth to catch up. And when it did, it returned a family to itself, proving that some bonds, no matter how buried, are never truly lost. The cameo completed its journey quietly. On the night Amina stood alone in her apartment, surrounded by framed photographs of a life finally reclaimed, she lifted the necklace in her palm and felt its weight, not heavy, but steady. It had once been a teenage promise, then a mother's last protection, then the only proof a lost child ever had that she belonged somewhere. Now it rested against her heart as something new, a symbol of survival, truth and return. She smiled at her reflection. She was no longer just the orphan who endured. She was no longer only the daughter who was found. She was the sum of every version of herself, and she was whole. Somewhere beyond memory and pain, she believed her mother knew. That love, even when buried under tragedy and time, does not disappear. It waits. And when the moment is right, it finds its way home. This story reminds us of a powerful truth: love leaves evidence, even when the world tells us something is lost forever. Even when silence stretches for years, truth has a way of resurfacing, often through the smallest details. A necklace, a name, a choice to look closer instead of walking away. Never underestimate the quiet acts of courage. Never assume your origin defines your worth. And never believe that time can erase what was meant to be found. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. What part of the journey moved you the most? Where are you watching from? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in stories of hope, reunion, and second chances, subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing stories that remind us miracles are real. They just take time.